Hello and welcome to BackPainMovement. I'm Simon Schmidt, your host. My guest today is Jason Round. He's the founder of MoveMore, a project in which he shares his personal experiences he gathered from different disciplines like bodybuilding, calisthenics, street workout, and movement with others. Jason grew up in Cornwall, England. He's the son of a Filipino mother and a Cornish father. His goal is to develop the global movement culture and assist anyone who reaches out with their own movement journey in any way he can. And now, Jason, welcome to BackPainMovement.
Thank you very much, Simon. A lovely introduction.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. I'm really happy to have you as my guest. First of all, you traveled around a lot on this globe, I'd say, and now you've been for a while in Switzerland. What makes probably Switzerland special or different from other countries?
Switzerland, this might sound a kind of shallow element, but the economy seems to affect people in specific ways. There's lots of stereotypes, of course, about the Swiss economy, the stability of it. And it's actually mentioned in that great book by Nassim Taleb quite a few times as an anti-fragile setup of a country. But Switzerland is one of those places that I always think it's not going to be that different from other Western cultures or, for example, English culture. But the nuances, the small things, are what make the big difference. So it's very hard in that sense to be specific about what makes it special or different. But that is definitely one thing. The work ethic brings about both very positive and negative things at the same time. Other than that, rather than the kind of economic element, the landscape. The landscape and the four seasons.
Yeah.
Coming from somewhere like England, where the seasonal difference is the difference between rain, not much rain, and no rain for half a day. It's great to have four different seasons, and being able to move with the seasons. It's something I didn't really have much of an opportunity before in some other places where these seasons didn't change so much. And there's lots of movement practitioners, for example, Joseph Bartz, who speaks about moving with the seasons and encourages people to move with the seasons. And we have this more ancestral, or I say kind of paleo movement about movement, which encourages people to use the outdoors in all types of weather. And yeah, the same as changing your environment changes the way you move within your house, like something as simple as putting up a pull-up bar. Of course, if you go outside and there's snow instead of sun, you're going to move a little bit differently. So yeah, that is really one of my things I love about Switzerland.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, I think I'd say a lot of Swiss people are sometimes hating the seasons, but it's always like when you're used to something, probably you can't even give it or measure it the right way. And when you're not having it, you're appreciating it. So yeah, it's kind of this. Yeah, of course, as you know, my podcast is about movement and back pain. What is the first thing that pops into your mind when you hear the term back pain?
When I hear the term back pain, there's not a single thing I would think of, because I think, which is the way you approach it as well, it's holistic. It's definitely holistic, and it can be too easy to throw around the word holistic and say, oh, it's holistic, it's just everything, because the problem is then if it's everything, it's also nothing, okay? So when I say it's holistic, what I mean is that your mood, your lifestyle, the actual way you move physically, your physical practices, your relationships, your habits, which it's not just the things you're doing. There's often this concept when we think of habits, it's always, what we do. Oh, I'm always smoking, I'm always this, always that. But it's the things that you're not doing as well.
Yeah.
You can't forget the other side of the coin. So when I think of back pain, I also think of complexity. Because it's so many things, it's necessarily something complex. However, despite it being complex, I also think that there are very, very simple steps that can be taken to alleviate certain forms of back pain. Of course, when it gets more specialized and more advanced, then there would be maybe more specific methods to deal with that. But in general, in my experience with back pain, and also friends that I know have back pain now, I also find that people speak a lot and do not much about it. And because it's a holistic thing, it means that there is never going to be a doctor over you 24 hours a day telling you what to do. And that's even if this advice that's given to you would be productive. We obviously have to keep that in account. So you have to take it upon yourself. There has to be action. And it has to be informed action. But yeah, something needs to be done.
Yeah.
Not just done to you. There's a big difference between moving and being moved. And this idea we can apply to so many different things. But that's kind of, people often wait until they're moved, for example, physically by a chiropractor. Please move me. I have this pain in my back. Can you move it? You've just handed the keys to someone else.
Yeah.
I had a great phrase today from my Systema teacher. He says, everyone has to bake their own bread.
Yeah.
You don't keep coming to my bread shop and buying my bread. At some time, you need to make your own recipe. It's going to be different to mine. You have different history, a different movement past, a different movement present, and the anticipation of a different movement future. So it's very, very individual. And with anything individual, it needs to be taken in the hands of the individual.
Interesting. And why do you think, or what could be the reason that people are giving the keys away? Or, yeah.
I think back pain, another thing that I didn't mention before, is back pain, it can be, of course, something very, very serious. It affects your entire life. Your movement comes from your spine.
Yeah.
If something affects your spine, of course it affects everything. And again, that's the nature of something holistic. If the holistic thing is affected, it affects everything holistically. So because it's so, integral, because it's so, oh my God, the back, the spine, people I think are scared to do certain stuff.
Okay.
In many cases. For example, I've had people who they have a certain back pain and they're too scared to move. They are scared to paralysis. Scared to paralysis, and they have a back pain problem. But it's a cultural thing. It's made so specialized. It is this big demon that we have to fight, back pain, and it's my whole lifestyle thing, and and I know what it feels like when you have this type of debilitating pain and you don't have tools to deal with it. You feel helpless.
Yeah.
It's the worst feeling in the world. And I think this in itself, there is a fear of back pain. And I don't think the fear is rightly deserved if people have tools to deal with it.
Yeah.
There's just a quote from Kelly Starrett. He just says, quite simply, that everyone should have the tools and the knowledge to perform self-maintenance.
Yeah.
And that's an education thing. So I would also say that with back pain, there's a lack of public education. Things as simple as hanging. I've had people who maybe can only come to my classes once a week. And in the first class with passive hanging, they can only manage 10 seconds and they have to hold a bit of tension to prevent the back pain. And this one girl, it's maybe her 5th or 6th class, once a week. And she says, like already, I don't feel the pain in my lower back. And she can hold a 30 second completely relaxed passive hang. It's not a miracle.
Yeah.
It's just a tool that everyone can use. It's just one among many. Of course, this hanging element was made very popular by Ido Portal. Yeah. It's also, if you're interested to read, it's based on the work of a doctor called Dr. Kirsch, who was a shoulder specialist. Okay. He actually wrote a very interesting, very easy to read ebook about shoulder pain. He focused mainly on the shoulder. But of course, when we have this modality of gravity affecting the spine, working these traction forces, there's an innate release happening as well. So we can apply the same concept from the shoulders to the spine.
Wow, interesting. One thing that I'm wondering is, in my opinion, as you said, that was a good point. Just giving the tools probably is not enough, because people do not know how to implement the tools in their everyday life. Yeah. Would you agree to that?
Yes, completely. And this is part of a larger cultural kettle of fish, which is, if I have to do something to my body, it's a type of exercise. And we've just entered the huge problem area. Exercise has a particular construct and presentation in our society. I exercised for many, many years of my life. I didn't enjoy one moment of it. Yeah, there are certain effects from the exercise that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
I don't like to speak for other people. However, there are very few people that enjoy the element of exercise when it's framed as exercise. Yeah. I'm not talking about movement when it's framed as movement. That's something completely different. But the specialist action of performing exercise, you go to some rehabilitation, they give you exercises to do. Oh, better do my exercises. I've got to do my exercises. Oh, I have to do these exercises. No one goes, yes, my exercises. So of course, when we're presented with something and it looks like exercise, immediately we have these predispositions in our mind of what we're having to do. And they're not normally present for the normal non-masochistic person. Yeah. So, but if I say to you, hey Simon, we're going to go and play on the monkey bars with your child for half an hour. If you said, oh no, my child and the monkey bars for half an hour, I would question your viability as a father. Okay? So if we frame it differently, if we can take away the frame altogether, if we can reframe, then these immediate preconditions of, oh, I've got to do these, they all disappear. And it makes things easier. So this is a reason why people have trouble implementing exercise into their daily life, because it's exercise.
Could you, or probably, I'm not sure if everybody can understand this difference between exercising and movement or moving. Can you explain it? What's the difference?
Exercise is movement.
Okay.
It's a type of movement. And movement is a category, a very large category, which could be described and should be more thought of as a philosophy. I'm not going to put it there and say it's a philosophy, because again, we've just put it in another container. It can be placed on the same level as the concept of living and life. I mean, if you're not moving, if nothing inside you is moving, that's a definition of death. Okay? So they're closely connected and they closely intertwine. And this is often the difficult thing. When I say movement, or when people say movement that are pursuing a movement practice, or developing a movement perspective, the people who are listening that are not familiar with this concept, they often ask for it to be reduced. And the problem is, as soon as you try to reduce this giant concept of what is movement, it's no longer movement. So it has to be that way. It has to stay. It cannot be diluted. It mustn't be diluted. So when we take a look at disciplines, we can look at certain disciplines, certain martial arts disciplines, disciplines from dance, disciplines, certain strength training disciplines. We have these disciplines. And then we have competition arenas, which are various types of sports. Of course, you can engage in that just as a hobbyist, but it still remains a sport. There has a goal, and there should be a winner or a loser. That has its own kind of things happening. And you have your daily, what I've previously termed as involuntary movement. And what I mean by involuntary movement is just how you pick up this glass now. Yeah, you didn't think, okay, what's the formula for picking up the glass? So 80 degrees of turn, the hand, I call this involuntary movement.
Okay, interesting.
And this is also movement.
Yeah.
So these are just three elements, of course. If I thought more, there would be much more, but it's all movement. So now we see how tiny exercise is, how small exercise is, and how specific and how specialized actually exercise is. And if we even go into the history of exercise and where it developed from, I mean, the modern fitness industry has used the term exercise so much to a point where I'm very reluctant to use the term exercise. Because for me, when I present something as an exercise, by definition, an exercise is something that needs to be repeated and repeated and repeated to achieve a specific goal. Movement's not always about that. The overarching goal is to move better. However, repetition and exercise is a tool.
Okay.
It's a fantastic tool. Exercise, repetition is the mother of learning. At some point, you need to repeat things for it to stay. However, it should be used as a tool. But when we start to think that, of course I move, I exercise, I join the fitness studio. If you're just repeating, you're specializing. And a specialist cannot have at the same time movement as their main priority.
Okay.
So my goal is to be a generalist and become kind of okay in as many fields as I can. Those fields I choose will be personal to me, as they should be. So I'll be more oriented to one thing than another. And at sometimes I will have to specialize more at this particular time to develop further. However, movement, if we think of it as a pyramid, movement comes from the bottom. And at the top, we have specialist things like sports and even exercise and repetition. Movement, the bottom of the pyramid, anything I do here will affect the top of the pyramid. It can improve it.
Okay.
But the opposite is not true. If I improve in my specialization, very rarely does it affect the bottom of the pyramid. And in many cases, it can make the bottom of the pyramid weaker. If we build this top too much, it becomes unstable. So what we find is people are focusing more on exercise and just repetition and specialization. The top of the pyramid is growing, 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 growing. And then your general movement ability, it decreases and even leads to injury or something like back pain. I'm a fantastic specialist at the deadlift. I've got a bad back. Not uncommon.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. And has this to do something with this, you told me about this paradigm shift that also was introduced by Edu Portal. Has this something to do with this? Is this like connected in some kind of?
Yes, completely. Edu Portal termed it the paradigm shift, which I think is a very useful phrase. And he also defined it as a paradigm shift is something necessarily that you somehow knew before. It was there, but it just didn't click yet.
Okay.
So you're almost there. So when someone says to you, oh, this, you're like, oh, yeah, I knew that, but I just didn't make the links.
Okay.
So it's the same thing. So in part of my history, I spent many years within the bodybuilding discipline. So I defined myself completely as a bodybuilder by my lifestyle, by my social relationships, by the way that other people viewed me, by the social character I developed. I was a bodybuilder. And this particular discipline is extremely specialist, extremely specialist. And innately it's involved with a lot of repetition. And then from there, through various times, I slowly evolved. I say evolved, it wasn't really an evolution, it was more of a digression into calisthenics and street workout training, which I spent a few years with. And then luckily within that discipline, it only took about 2 or 3 years before I realized that something wasn't quite right. With bodybuilding, it took me a good 7 or 8 years to realize. And so it took me only 2 or 3 years to realize I'd gone from one extreme to the other. I've just gone from moving weights, only moving weights, to only moving my body weight. So yeah, that moment when I encountered the work and the concepts and the ideas that Ido Portal brought to the table, I'm not the only person, definitely not the only person to say that it put things into a perspective, a movement perspective, and then once you are given this perspective, this permission almost to look at movement in a particular way, the field clears.
Yeah.
The fog clears and you start to see things in perspective rather through a single lens. And I don't mean to say that my perspective at the moment is complete or is the perspective. If I were to say that, I would have failed at my own task, to be honest. It will necessarily always be developing. But yeah, this is the paradigm shift when you have a realization that this is a lot bigger than I thought it was. And then you have 2 choices. You can either retreat and run backwards, or you can bring yourself into it. I chose the second one.
Yeah, definitely. You told me that at this time when I think you first got in touch with this movement culture, you stayed in Australia and you were a personal trainer and you were kind of unhappy. So can you explain where this unhappiness did come from and how did you react to it?
Yeah, that was an interesting one because my first reason for becoming a personal trainer was authority.
Okay.
Not in the way of I want to tell people what to do, well, not on a grand scale, but more in the fact that I considered myself quite knowledgeable in that specific practice at that time. And I saw people telling other people what to do within this practice, and I didn't agree with them. I was like, no, that's not the best thing to do. But of course they listened to this guy or girl because they had a personal trainer badge.
Okay.
So I remember I was at the age of 18 or 19. I was like, I just want to do this so I can just say to people, hey, do this, and I can tell you what to do because I have this piece of paper. Yeah? What a great reason to get that and pay the money. Yeah. So anyway, I did that and I took the course, and while I was in Australia, of course there was a great market for personal training there. And I joined a facility that specialized in promoting personal training, so very quickly I gained a lot of clients.
Okay.
And in my mind I was, what's better than this? This is what I wanted, 25, 30 plus regular clients. money coming in enough for me, and the ability to share some certain things. And what I found was people wanting to be spoon-fed and not doing work, and it offended me. It really offended me because I was putting in so much work for this thing, and then people thought they could just come to me and pay me money. They didn't even want my knowledge. They didn't want I was offering them knowledge. My tagline, my slogan on my PT card was that I provide education. Because even at that time, I wanted to give more than just instruction. I felt at that time I had some tools that could benefit people. Of course it was for a specialist thing. We were mostly concerned with aesthetics. Yeah. I came from a bodybuilding background, come on. And it was not received in the way that I wanted it to be. The people weren't training hard. And the people who were training hard didn't want to pay me for my input because they thought that they knew everything, So interestingly, it was usually the younger ones that came to me for some of the information and that were also training hard. So yeah, I found myself with a load of clients that I just didn't want to meet. For example, if I had to cancel a session, their response would be relief.
Okay.
And and I was like, I don't want to, very quickly I realized after about 8 months that I don't want to do this anymore, this personal training stuff, unless I have people who really have goals and want to develop and progress. They didn't want to develop or progress, they just wanted quick fixes and someone to chat to for a few hours.
Yeah.
And it really, and then I saw it's just the side that for me, someone who had a passion for, at that time, just training, who had a passion for training, and the people just basically weren't doing their work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, did this change?
You mean since in being in the fitness?
Yeah, exactly.
And now being in the movement arena?
Exactly.
Yes. However, you still get the same thing. However, now I feel like I have more of a right to say to people, I don't want to meet you.
Okay.
Because you're not doing what I'm wanting to promote. You want me to do something in particular for you. I will help you with the things that I agree with, but the things that I don't necessarily agree with, even though I might have some knowledge with that, I'm not going to do that with you. Okay. For example, I had someone recently, and I get this quite a bit from CrossFit people, can we do some PT sessions to learn the kipping ring muscle up and the kipping bar muscle up? And they can't even do a chest to bar pull-up. And for me, there's nothing wrong with a kipping pull-up or a kipping muscle up, but it's a developmental variation. And coming from a strength training background, for a newcomer who's coming to movement or in their arena exercise or their sport, you want to establish some foundations. You don't want to go straight to extremely dynamic work, which should be at a more advanced level. So I want to build on a certain process. And some people can't handle that. Some people are like, well, why are we doing these? Why am I moving my scapula? I just want to do a muscle up now. Okay. And it's like, dude, if I put my hand between your shoulder blades, you can't squeeze my hand. Your scapula doesn't work. So some people, they approach me for certain things and they see certain things. And now when people call me, I say to them first, yes, I'm very happy to help you with your personal goals, but you also have to understand that I'm coming from a movement perspective and what I'm sharing is movement. So we will also be focusing on certain other things. So now I've learned I won't compromise as much. I will stand for what I believe. And of course, this could change completely, you know. I mean, that's the nature of evolution and development. But at this moment in time, I'm happy to say that And once again, on the other side of the coin, I again see, it's interesting, the younger people who come for me to advice that are actually a lot more open-minded than the older people.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I found this quite a bit, and I have a few close friends and students that I do programming for regularly, some more regularly than others. And yeah, they follow the program, they ask questions. Also, they start to change it slightly in certain ways that if I'm happy with it, that if I think it's going the right way, then I'm very happy for them to start developing it themselves. But yeah, with movement now, when I have personal training, it's more fulfilling, definitely. Okay. It's more fulfilling. And because it's new, people don't always come to it with preconceptions of what they should be doing. Whereas if you have a fitness client, if they leave and they're not sweating to the ground, they feel like they've wasted their money.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas someone approaches me for some information and some personal coaching with regards to movement, and I share what I can and what I believe is good for them, they're not complaining at the end if they haven't sweated profusely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And as you have traveled around quite a bit, have you noticed differences in cultures regarding like this, the mindset, how people are approaching exercising, or in your case, like movement exercises?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. It's cultural, right? It's cultural. I mean, anything that is even imported from another culture will be received differently. Yeah, try the Chinese food here and try the Chinese food in China, you know? And for example, in South Korea, where I lived for about a year, of course, they have a history of particular martial arts, especially Taekwondo. So this also affects their cultural response to movement. So obviously they have many people have more of a martial arts mindset. And for example, in Czech Republic, where you have a very strong street workout culture, very strong calisthenics culture. When we move more east as well, into Ukraine, into Lithuania, into Poland, they have more of a street workout culture. And their street workout culture, in my belief and from my experience, comes from the fact that the wages aren't so high and not everyone can afford gyms.
Yeah, okay.
So they have facilities outside in various places that you can move in. I love small calisthenics parks. There's nothing better that I like than being by the lake, and then there's a small calisthenics park there. You go and do some strength work, you go for a swim, get some food, do some strength work again. Comes with the good and the bad. And then you have the street workout culture, which actually was imported from America. But from the American side of things, street workout came more from the penitentiary. Because in the prisons, you didn't have so many weights and things, and so you did work out with whatever you can, you know. So that comes from a different cultural history, and yet on the face value has the same form. And then again, from in South Korea, they like to move, but they are very in this kind of repetition thing. You just kind of repeat and repeat and repeat. And it's similar to something Ido Portal mentioned when he was in China, and he was in a martial arts class, and he said he saw one girl performing the same punch for 3 hours because no one told her to stop. Okay. So, for example, the more elderly Korean people, they stay very, very active, but it's kind of walking around in circles for hours.
Okay.
I've seen old people walk in just circles around like a 200-meter track, like 2-3 hours, just walking, power walking. So they have very set movement patterns, just like they have very set cultural traditions.
Yeah.
So that kind of permeates that. And then, of course, in Australia, we have the sun, we have the outdoors. So we have a lot of the culture of the aesthetic physique, of course, Bondi Beach and all these elements. So when I was there, it was all about, you know, abs, bums and tums and things like this. Yeah, so definitely in different places people have, there's often a prevailing attitude or approach and understanding of what movement is and what the goals of movement are. And that's very strongly a cultural thing.
Okay. And then you would say like society is very important regarding how a culture is developing regarding a movement practice. For example, once you mentioned to me that like in South Korea there's like this floor culture.
Yep.
For example, that we in Switzerland we do not have, or rarely have. We have like these chairs, tables and whatever. We rarely sit on the floor. So this kind of stuff is also influencing our behavior.
Definitely. I mean, floor culture is something that I've recently tried to bring attention to more in my classes and workshops. And it's more of a framing. I use it as a frame to present certain movements. So whereas before I would present these particular movements as, you know, ways to move efficiently across the ground and things like this, they are, but actually for me I think the better way to speak about it is just as floor culture. Because it means two things. First of all, it means that culture has wider applications. If I say it's an efficient way to move across the floor, then if I don't have a reason to move across the floor efficiently, it has no use. So if I call it floor culture, and it also has the idea of culture like I'm culturing something, like I'm developing something, I'm changing something. And culture is a lot more permanent than a specific method.
Yeah.
So floor culture for me, I've always been familiar with it because of my mum's background. I travelled to the Philippines quite regularly when I was a child. I was very familiar with things like squatting toilets, like people just sitting for a chat in a squat, being more on the floor in general. And so it was more common to me. But then when I went to South Korea, and their floor culture is more pronounced because, for example, in restaurants, generally you would have half the tables are all sitting,
Okay.
and the other half would be seated ones.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, and generally the seated ones are for the bigger groups and stuff. And again, this affects the culture a lot. You go for a meal with a bunch of guys, and they're sitting there, their feet, rubbing their feet, and then grabbing the food and stuff like this. It just promotes a more relaxed culture and stuff. But the other thing I noticed was that one of my colleagues at the time, who must have been well into his 60s, had no problem sitting cross-legged or in various positions on this floor for a period of up to 3 hours. However, one of my other colleagues, who was an American, he's actually, interestingly enough, an American Filipino, he carried enough Western influence that he could not sit on this floor for 10 minutes.
Okay.
So when we went for food with him, we either had to always sit on the high chairs, or he would have to take a stool and put them up higher in order to be able to feel comfortable on the floor. So of course, it just shows that if this is always a habit, a cultural habit, a culture, a personal culture or a more like a countrywide or culture, then these small things, they permeate your life, and they will continue to permeate your life. I don't want to give you a squat routine for you to do daily. I want your squat to be your squat routine. Yeah, I want your daily movement of reaching for your phone or your folder or grabbing something to be your squat routine. I want you to have the understanding that floor culture or being on the floor is not just so I can perform a routine efficiently or the resting squat. It's becoming very like this today. Like, have you got your resting squat? Tick. It's like, come on, it's just a position of rest and many, many other things. So if we culture this and we develop a floor culture, an understanding of just being on the floor will improve so many problems. We'd be in much better standing. Yeah. I mean, it should definitely still be taken progressively with certain people. Like my friend who had problems sitting for 10 minutes just on the floor. I'm not going to, say, stay down there for 2 hours. That'll sort you out. Like, again, you have to, that's actually when I feel that I would come in.
Yeah.
That's where I want to come in for people. When people say, look, I haven't got this basic ability, I don't just want to send them a video clip and go, just do this, because the video clip will work, but they won't develop floor culture. And there's a very real chance that they might even get their resting squat and then never use it again, and then it goes back again. Yeah. Of course it's going to happen. But if you develop a culture of movement, that's when we come to this bigger subject of movement culture, but not to go there yet. If we develop a floor culture within ourselves, our families, our friends, it carries huge benefits. Yeah.
And how do you implement movement, or how do you integrate a movement culture in your life?
Do you mean more generally, or do you mean specifically the floor culture element?
No, in general.
In general, okay. So one of the actual, where the name for the MoveMore project came from, which was first a personal project. I actually used it firstly to on a blog to speak about my transition from bodybuilding to calisthenics. And it was just quite ironic that I didn't expect the movement part suddenly to come along. That was kind of unexpected. But of course, this was where it carried on to. But MoveMore also found good standing with a phrase from Ida Botal, which was live more dynamically, move more. And what for me this means, it's not about doing more. It's a very easy mistake to make, and it comes again from our more fitness-oriented background and maybe even competitive sports-oriented background, that moving more means doing more reps, more hours, more different exercises, more. It's not so.
Yeah.
Move more means basically move more complex. So the way that you can do this is, first of all, something like floor culture. I have a sofa in my front room, but I also always have a yoga mat on the floor. And this is basically just my floor island. And my first go-to is always the floor island. I sit on my floor island. My girlfriend and I, we didn't have a table, so we just bought a tabletop from IKEA, and we just measured. I actually sat down and I checked the height I would like to have this, and we got the table at the right height for me. Yeah. And and this is how I implemented it. And it was amazing, because within the space of 6 months, I realized that my hip mobility, if we want to call it hip mobility and frame it, that it got a lot better from not doing anything, from floor culture. Yeah, that's why people say, "Oh, my hips are really stiff," and sit on the floor, stay there for 3 hours, and what happens? They have to move. Yeah, and that's a good thing. They're moving more, just out of a need. So we can move more dynamically and move more by giving ourselves the conditions under which to move more. If I have to stay on the floor, I have to move, because of course it gets uncomfortable. And we're so obsessed with this idea of comfort. Everything needs to be exactly comfortable, perfect, so comfortable that guess what? I don't need to move. And it's seen as like this great thing. I call it the comfort myth. But floor culture, of course, just being on the floor, giving ourselves the necessity to be more on the floor can makes you live more dynamically. And then you have the small games that you can play and the habits you can build. So the very, very simple one is taking 2 steps at once.
Okay.
But you have to be very strict about it in the beginning. You have to catch yourself. And I set myself basically for a year. 1 year, I'm not allowed to take single steps.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Down, up and down steps.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the knee stability that you will build and the effect on your VMO, your vastus medius oblique here, in helping stabilize the knee. And then also when you start performing it with more large frame movements, like whether it's pistol squats or whatever you're into, was very unexpected. Because if you take 2 steps down a step, that act of reaching for the step in front of you has an amazing amount of stress on the back knee if you're not used to it.
Yeah.
But it's just small enough. Just small enough. It's like the Chinese water torture. Yeah? But what we're not getting a negative effect out of it. It's building towards a positive effect.
Yeah.
And things like the joints and the ligaments in the body, they need this constant stimulus.
Yeah.
They need a constant stimulus. And it's also about strengthening, but it's also about building a certain neural drive in there, which means it's being activated and it's getting the message, okay, I need to start being used. And then other things like maybe hypertrophy or certain molecular changes will happen to the tissues in the body there as well. But something as simple as that, taking 2 steps at once. And now I run down the steps 2 at once. And like in the very first of all, I started it when I was in Czech Republic. I was right, okay, I have to be safe about this as well. What would my dad say? Like, Dad would say, just make sure your hands are in front of you, okay? So there's this image of me every time running for the metro, like this, down the steps, like 2 steps at once. I've never once fallen, but it's very, very possible, definitely. Take a wrong step. So not only am I attacking this kind of element of moving more just through something as simple as the steps, I'm also tackling a fear element. Small. Day by day, day by day. The ability to run down steps. I'm not going to program someone and say, okay, Thursday is running down steps day. Just run down those steps as fast as you can, 2 at a time. It's not the point. The point is that these small changes, seemingly insignificant. For example, when I go to the train station, you have 2 levels of bike racks, the top and the bottom. First, I'm very proud that I always find the one that was closest to the front, and I can put my bike at the bottom easily. You'd find one at the bottom and you're like, yeah, good. And then I thought, what kind of mover am I? So now I deliberately choose the one that's further away, unless I have like a specific time restraint, and I always put it on the top one. Always put it on the top one. Small things like this. You just make things more difficult for yourself. My friend mentioned one which I haven't fully practiced because it keeps slipping my mind, but is turning off your lights with your foot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a bit more hard to apply because it's kind of, the steps are more easy because you get to the steps, and actually when you get good at it, there's a nice rhythm. It's like ding, ding, ding. And I always have this image in my mind, like if someone's chasing me and I run down the steps and be like, what the? Like this, yeah, things like this. The train. Where possible, I always sit on the floor unless I have something specific to do where I want to be seated. So I'll sit in the doorway part, and it's a very convenient place to stretch the legs. I'll always sit in a straddle where possible. Even for wrist strength, when I lie back, just like this, instead of lying on 2 hands, I just put my wrists backwards and lie on my wrists. And it's just a certain awareness. So this is how you can start to live more dynamically. It can be games, or it can be something more deliberate, like staying on the floor. Having a pull-up bar here is a fantastic thing. Like, when people say to me, yeah, you know, I'm really enjoying the pulling, but the hanging and stuff, but, you know, I can only not do it regularly. Just get a pull-up bar, man. Put it at your bedroom door, and every time you walk past it, even if you don't feel like it, hang. Just touch your hands to the floor, just as a matter of habit. And the next thing you know, you might be crawling on the floor for half an hour. But put yourself in the position, create the scenario where you have to move. You might just move for 3 seconds. You might move for 2 hours. You have to create the scenarios.
Wow, some great tips about there. I have mine. I try to improve my balance, my one leg balance. So, and now that's my habit. I just, for putting on and putting off my shoes, I always just standing on one leg. It's just a little thing, but that's like one habit of mine.
That's exactly perfect. Exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, these things.
And what would you recommend for people that are spending like the normal PC worker, or people who are working a lot in front of a PC, like they are, they are fixed to the chair or probably to a standing table. Have you, or how do you encounter this scenario when you have to work probably for a couple of hours in front of your laptop or whatever? How do you approach this? Or?
I've had personal experience where I've had to work at long hour stretches in front of a computer. And it's kind of unfortunate that the solutions that would be the best are not socially acceptable. And this is something I spoke to you about previously, the social policing of movement. But they're just not acceptable. Like, if I worked in a high standing office or something, doing whatever it is that high standing office people do, and I asked my boss, I want to get rid of this table and I just want to have a cushion on the floor and a small table with my laptop, he'd be like, GTFO. Like, you know, excuse me, we're running a business here, not a daycare movement camp. Like, so I appreciate that those things are not always available. However, you can move more than you think. The very, very first thing I would say, being very specific, because I think often people like specific things, move your scapula, move the wings, move the wings or you never fly. You seriously, if there's one thing, well, there's probably a handful of things that I would just give to everyone just to help get this body back, get the movement of the body back, get everything reintegrated, is just move the areas where we get problems. Move the scapula. For the first, it must have been at least the first year of my movement practice, when I started developing what I thought a movement practice was, which is still what I'm doing now, actually, I was always just doing this. Always just moving the shoulders. And as we experienced before, the coordination element, move one shoulder one way and one shoulder the other way. You can really, fuddle people with this for hours to the point of frustration. And this is the place where they should be, because that frustration is telling them, what, I should be able to do this. But often we run away from that and go, it's just stupid. It's like, nah, man, it's quite, if you do want a functioning scapula, this is what a functioning scapula does. Scapula is related to many problems, neck problems, obviously transferring up into the neck as well, that people get, jaw. People get jaw problems, transmitting from the neck, referring from the scapula, even shoulder problems. Rob Wolf, who is a very prominent person who speaks about paleo diet, one of the things he wrote was that shoulder mobility, from his belief, very few people have problems with shoulder mobility specifically. I mean, the shoulder is a very mobile joint with near 360 degrees of motion. It kind of just hangs off the edge here like that. His point of view, he would say, why do we need to mobilize it more? In his experience, he says that it's more to do with people's thoracic spine and, of course, the surrounding scapula as well. And once this is mobilized, a lot of shoulder problems can kind of disappear.
Okay.
So this is one thing. Move the scapula all the time. Move the neck. Like, you want to be able to control neck guide, move as you will. And you can develop this as much or as little as you like. But first step is get those shoulders rolling and squeezing right back. Squeeze it right back. You know, you can do this. And then the other way, crunching up. All the positions. This you can do constantly. It needs to be habitual. And the second thing you can do is moving the whole spine. Moving the whole spine. Those would be things just while you're working, constantly. Move the toes within the shoes. Take off the shoes, if possible, take them off. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Move the fingers through the full range of motion. I do this with people weekly with classes, and I say, okay, move your fingers, and what does everyone do? It's completely true. And then I tell them to go the whole range, and they're like, like it's some kind of magic trick. It's like, no, these are your fingers. These are your fingers. And it's the same with the wrists. If we were to keep the advice just, I say simple, but to one concept, move through a full range of motion regularly, daily. A full range of motion. And that doesn't mean you go to the gym and do squats, because most people don't move through a full range of motion when they do squats. Move the fingers, moving the thoracic, moving the shoulders, moving the neck, moving the feet, moving the toes. Even through these actions, you're bringing awareness to your body. Massage the knees. Hit yourself. Yeah. Feel the skin, feel the hair, feel the head. Okay. Back to work. It's still there. I don't forget about my body. It's still there. Yep, it's here. Okay. Yeah, it seems stupid. It seems stupid. This is what I mean by not socially accepted, right? But I mean, hitting is often used in certain practices. I've been to dance workshops, and I've spent about 20 minutes hitting myself. Especially today, I was at a Sistema workshop, and we did work just hitting each other for about half an hour. Just to take away this negative response to being hit. I mean, some people can have very strong emotional responses to being hit in the wrong way, even if it doesn't cause pain. And, you know, that's something, it's not the hit that caused the emotional pain. The hit brought out something that was already there. Of course, if it's not done with malice and in that context. And the other thing I would say is, give yourself as many movement snacks as possible. And this phrase, movement snacks, I took from a guy called Frank Forensich. I probably butchered his last name. He's an American guy. He has a really, really great book I love called Exuberant Animal. He comes very much from the kind of, what I call it, the paleo and ancestral side of movement, which from that came things like Rafe Kelly's Evolve, Move, Play, and Ben Medder, who works out of London. They're kind of collaborating and stuff and kind of other things. And movement snacks. So a deliberate 5 to 20 minutes that you give yourself. Maybe for business people, you might even want to put that, 12:10 to 12:30 is my movement snack. And you have to do it. And you just keep it really simple, really organic. That's 5 to 20 minutes. Get down into your squat. You don't need to do a squat routine. If you've got one you want to do it. But get into the squat, move around, hands on the floor, stand up, come down, reach the arms full, fill the space, come small again, reach out, you know, swing the arms, swing them for their full range, shake the legs, do some spinal movements, you know. If you want to do push-ups and stuff, you can do push-ups. But I mean, again, that's not really a full range of motion. Express your body for those 15 minutes through its full range of motion and go back to your work.
Wow, interesting. I think great advice for a lot of office workers. Can you tell me something more about this concept you called the comfort myth? Comfort myth. I have trouble remembering where
it came from, whether it came from me or whether it was influence from someone else. But I'm pretty sure I thought of it and I wrote a blog piece on it, which is I have an old blog if anyone's interested in reading stuff online. It's on WordPress, so it's wordpress.com/MoveMore. I put the extra move at the end because it means like move again more. That's not true at all, actually. It's not true. Okay. Move more was taken, so I had to put another more on the end. But the problem is now it looks like move, mo, remove. But it's, internet stuff. I'm not big on the internet stuff. Anyway, the comfort myth. Basically, as I mentioned before, this idea, the state of being comfortable in many different ways, physically and through affluence, through money, even through things like stable relationships. But that's the best thing that we should strive for and stay in, aka a comfort zone. Yeah. Looking at physically, the comfort myth is the idea that we want the lazy boy chair is the perfect example. Yeah. It's called a lazy boy chair. It means you're being lazy. But we want to not have to move from this position at all. And now everything's perfect. Oh no, there's a fly on my face. How dare you disrupt my comfort? The fly just saved you. Yeah, you needed to. This is the point where sometimes being moved comes in handy. But I actually also like to look at things historically. And for me, the comfort myth also has roots, and it's connected to floor culture. The comfort myth is the idea that I'm very, very comfortable and I don't have to move while I'm sitting in my chair as the master, while you get down and you do the work in the fields and do everything for me. Yeah. People might see this as extreme, but I like to make these analogies. So whether you want to think of it as an analogy or whether you want to think of it as literally is your choice. But this is also why very often when I'm just squatting, most often at the train station waiting, because I only have to arrive 2 minutes late for a Swiss train, which is good. They arrive on time. But but if I'm sitting, and sometimes if it's not too dirty and stuff, I'll sit on my knees and a bit of sitting practice, influenced by the fighting monkey as well. That was very useful. And some people will look at you like you've done something wrong. And here we go, and here we transgress into the social policing of movement as well. Yeah. So I'll speak about that later. But the comfort myth, get down on the floor and do your work and do things like that and let me be comfortable in my chair and I don't have to move and do anything. And it's really, for years, not in all cultures, mostly in Western cultures, it's just been very, very promoted. Comfort. Yeah. It's very, very promoted. And comfort is not having to move. And in many cases, we're not moving when actually parts of our body are screaming to be moved. And you see it in children. You strap the child into the chair. What's the first thing the child does? They scream. Why are you screaming? Why are you crying? Well, it's quite obvious because they're showing you, they're trying to get out, they just want to move. They don't like the feeling of restriction. But of course, as we get older, we take this on ourselves and we self-police ourselves. We make ourselves stop moving because we're not children anymore, and therefore we shouldn't, adults don't have this urge to move, and as we say in England, fidget around. We stay still. You ever watch the royal family? Yeah, at one of the Queen's meetings, man, they just sit. Not a move. And what's the definition of control when we look at things at military? Yeah, everyone's exactly pronounced, and then they move when they're told to move, but they move in a specific way. So this is the comfort myth, the idea that being comfortable is something we should aspire to. It's a very basic idea, but from that comes these other concepts like social policing of movement and floor culture and things as well.
Now I'm wondering, we had I think 3 weeks ago, we had, I had the honor to to having you as my teacher in Landsberg.
Yeah.
And it was great. And I'm just wondering, what did you think about 2 hours we spent together, about me, about my journey? I decided to go ahead.
Well, I'll tie it in with what we spoke earlier, because actually someone like yourselves, and I'm not just saying this because you're here in front of me and hosting me in your house, which is really nice of you, but you are exactly the type of person that I would love to assist in any way possible through a movement journey. You're the type of person who's very open-minded to it, even if sometimes you're clearly like, what is this? Like, I'll do it anyway. And this is exactly the process and the mindset that has to be done. And you mentioned it earlier with your own online coaching journey, that there are things that just don't make sense now, but you know that probably a few years down the line, you'll finally get it. But you're not the type of person that like, no, I need answers and a reason for doing this right now. Those are the type of people that will not learn under any circumstances, any framework, under any discipline, under any subject. So that was the first thing. It's very, very refreshing just to have someone who just do it. Of course, be critical or have questions, definitely, but don't judge immediately. Don't judge. So that was a great thing. Also, you had just the classic, I say symptoms or conditions of someone who hasn't moved through a whole range of motion in the maybe the past few decades. So this is something, the more I teach, the more I see, and the more often shocks me, quite on like a humanitarian level in some cases, where it's like, of course, everyone thinks if I'm not fat, I'm fine. Well, I'm sorry, because I've had some very overweight people in my movement classes that perform 10 times and they move way better than you. Because some of these, maybe they might be carrying more body fat, but some of them had histories in dance. When they were younger, they did gymnastics. And I'm sorry, maybe you don't like the way they aesthetically look, but they move 10 times better than you do. And you've got muscles and you've got all this stuff, but your movement is dog shit. Yeah? So this is one of the things when people have certain problem areas, and normally it's very commonly to do with the thoracic and the hip area. These are classic symptoms. Yeah. Classic symptoms, the not being able to coordinate in specific ways. And I always say to people when they're like, oh, it's really, I'm like, yeah, the only difference between you and me is time. It's the only difference between you and me, it's time. But time doing the stuff. Yeah. Time moving. So in some cases I give people specific routines that are quite numbered and about, do a specific amount of repetitions of this, followed by this, followed by this. But I do that because I think many people require that, first of all. Okay. But that's not the main goal. I don't want people to be like, okay, I did my 50, okay, done. It's like, no, the goal is those are stabilizers so that when it moves, you don't need that anymore. You want to get rid of that as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. I don't want you doing opposite thoracic circles for the next year. I want you to get it, and once you've got it, integrate it in something else. We make the movement bigger. We add it to other stuff. Yeah. We use it as a concept. Mm-hmm. So, that was another thing. And we did some floor culture work as well. We moved along the floor. And it's also nice because for me, I learned that quite systematically, and it was quite a nice revelation for me when I did learn some of it. A lot of it came from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, certain elements, and a guy called Dewey Nielsen who has some really useful online videos and stuff, and he works closely now with Dr. Andrea Spina. Okay, yeah. And they do the FCR stuff and the cars, rails and pails and all that jazz. And so it was nice to see for you how it was like, oh wow, this I can move along the floor like this. That was fantastic as well. I love it when I introduce it to people, just stuff that's just been shared with me. And they have a positive response, that kind of light response, like, oh, this is kind of cool, right? This is like useful in a way. So that was really nice as well. Yeah.
And thank you. Yeah, for me too. Probably, can you share with us your thinking about, you mentioned it earlier, frustration? How important is this, frustration in your own development?
Yeah. Frustration is not something that was fully brought to my attention until, not consciously, as a subject or as a concept in itself. Of course, I'd experienced the frustration through my personal practice. But for me, it was just like, you just do it. But actually, some people, and rightly I can understand, that when the frustration hits, it's just really like, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's stronger for some people than others. For example, I've seen people just like, as soon as the frustration hits, it shuts down. And then the worst response is then backlash. When they say like, hey, this is complete BS. Like, I don't need to be doing this. I had one of my friends once, we were doing some stuff. And then I saw the frustration hitting him, and he finally ended it in the classic British way. He was just lying there and he said, Jay, I can't be dealing with this, mate. It's a classic British response. I can't be dealing with this. And then I knew it, the frustration had just hit him too hard. But if you have the goal of being more generalist, which if you're interested in movement and you want to make movement your priority, that comes innately with it. Your goal is also to be a generalist, because movement is a generalist thing. Yeah, as I said, it's the bottom of the pyramid, the widest part. We're not pinpointing here. So frustration will come. It always comes. And there's two things you can do. It's the shutdown mode. There's three things you can do, actually. You can do the shutdown mode, as I can't be dealing with this. The second mode is, which was very nicely described as, okay, fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. Like that's the other one. And the last one is just to be masochistic about it and just go like, yeah, I'm gonna do it even more, just because I hate it. I'm gonna do it because I dislike it. And I like this attitude. This is the attitude that I try and do. Like, I like to try and do things I dislike, just as an element of self-dominance. Say, no, you're not in control, I'm in control, even though it's the same person, right? So the frustration is a limiting factor. It will test you, which means it's a very useful training friend. If you're constantly challenged by frustration, you have a constant challenge. Something as simple as, which I'm just so terrible at, I've always been terrible with the accuracy of my feet, and also the power management of my feet. I've never really been engaged in disciplines where footwork was so important. So when I try to kick a ball with my feet, it's like trying to watch a fish run on a treadmill, So the frustration is so strong, but it means that when I make the slightest amount of progress, it's always something. But even then, the slow progress can even add to the frustration even more. But once in one area or one task, one movement scenario, or one movement or one exercise that you're doing, once you start seeing the success, then you're like, wow, actually, on the other side of this frustration, if I can push through it, there's the stuff that I've always wanted. That's where it is. But you can't go around the frustration. You can't go around it. You have to go right through the middle. And you have to dig and keep digging and keep digging and keep digging. And then hopefully, if you get through the other side, the reward will be great. And it's a process that some practitioners really promote in certain ways. They'll create a deliberately frustrating atmosphere, and they won't give you instructions, which is a fantastic technique that I've never used previously before, and I've started using it more. I had one girl in my class the other day. We were doing like movement puzzles. It's just a simple task with a stick, which comes from an Ido Portal workshop. And she was like, "Can you just show me it again?" No. And she looked at me in shock and disbelief. I said, "No, figure it out." And she was like, you know, like, you're the teacher. You're supposed to tell me. It's like, no, I'm just sharing information with you. I didn't come here to teach anything. If I've taught you something and you've learned, that's just a bonus. But you have to tell me if you've learned. And if you want to call me teacher, you can. But I'm not going to come here and say, "I'm your teacher. This is how you do it." For me, that's the wrong approach. So, but frustration, it needs to be met head on. And I think if you really want to develop in a generalist way, you also have to seek out areas of frustration.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be linked to the things you're bad at. No one was ever frustrated by something they were really good at, you know? And that's what I like about the Ido Portal method. He says, you know, as soon as you get good at it and you start liking it, change it.
Yeah.
Because you're entering into a realm that's not the place a generalist wants to be if they want to keep progressing. Change it.
Yeah. Yes, it's amazing. You already introduced me a little bit to this concept called the movement matrix.
Yep.
Can you explain it in more detail to me, please?
Yeah, of course. I'll have to reference Ido Portal again, because the reason the movement matrix concept struck me so deeply was because they were very similar. So Ido Portal has a process he calls the approach to movement mastery. And that's isolation, integration, and improvisation. The concept being that it can be applied to large frame macro things as well as micro things, but you isolate certain areas as much as is possible, whether that's a specific discipline. We approach just this discipline and we specialize in that to take something from it, or whether we choose a specific part of the spine to move, or we focus on this part of the spine. Of course, there's going to be more movement in the whole body, but that's the goal. Once we have those elements working, we start putting them together into integration. So if we take this to a discipline level, which I would call the macro level, you can look at something like mixed martial arts. By definition, it's integration, a mixture of martial arts, and you get something different. Or with the spine, you would then integrate that into a different movement of the spine, and you would have like a certain spinal movement, like a spinal wave. The third part of the improvisation would be then that you have enough of these different elements that you can improvise as you like freely with your body, in any way you please. So if I were to say, "Hey Simon, there's a floor, move," you wouldn't just look at me like, "Oh, what?" Yeah. So the idea is that you would then have a vocabulary that you can express. Yeah. It's like speaking. The movement matrix was brought to my attention through my Russian Systema classes. A really great teacher in Bern, Dragisha Jojic. I probably said his name completely wrong, but anyway. Systema Bern, he's been teaching in Bern alone for 35 years, and he is interested, his focus is on the creation work of Systema. So a lot of people, if they're familiar with Systema, they might think about because it was used in special forces, and if you Google it, you're going to find a load of Russian guys basically really going at it with each other, or some other stuff that just kind of doesn't look really real, like he touches him and the guy flies 5 miles. But his element is the creation work, and looking at breaking the body and creating opportunities from a landscape. And he uses the concept, he has 3 levels of a movement matrix. He actually uses it for Systema, but it can be applied to movement because actually he is more speaking about movement than Systema in specific. So the first level is related to reflex. So for example, if I come to you and I come and touch you and you're not looking, your first instance is probably like to freeze, and we go tense. And the problem with that is as soon as we're tense, we're vulnerable. Someone gives me the slightest push and I just fall. So this would be the first instance, your reflex, and you have these small different areas of knowledge that are not really integrated. So it can be visualized as a big circle with just some lines in it, like this. It's bits like sticks. I have some reflexes, but they're not organized, they're not to a specific goal, and in general my movement ability wouldn't be that great because I don't have optionality. The second stage of the movement matrix, so you build your movement matrix through movement experience. This is really important. You have to experience movement and also search for new optionalities and create new options, because the very real problem is that you just repeat the same stuff again. So in the second stage, you can visualize it as a circle with a lot more sticks and areas of knowledge, and now some of them are crossing over. They're integrating. So now you're finding some of them crossing over, but now we've moved from reflex to brain memory. So I've learned a few things, I've learned like a handstand, I've learned a floor movement, I've learned a movement with my spine, and now I'm kind of starting to put it together, but I have to think, wait a minute, I'm here, okay, oh yeah, and that goes there, oh yeah, I can go there, and this is like the integration phase. And then the last phase can be visualized as a circle again, but the whole circle is completely filled. And this is a complete matrix. This would be the level of improvisation. And also from this filled circle comes another bubble here, and they connect, and it's creativity. Now that you have a complete movement matrix, you can create. You can create in the other ones a little bit, but it's not to the best degree. So this is the movement matrix, level 1, level 2, and level 3. And the goal of a movement practitioner would be to build that matrix, quite simply. Build that matrix as much as possible. No one's gonna fill it. If you think you filled your matrix, you're lying. Okay? Of course, you can have a more filled matrix than others. So that's always the goal. Experience, movement experience, will build your matrix and bring you closer to the creative element. And also what Ira Botal would call the improvisation stage.
Interesting. Never heard of that before, this movement matrix. Probably a word about your project, MoveMore Move.
It's just MoveMore actually. The more was
just
the extra more was a necessity because web domains were taken up, of course, by removal sites and people that take your furniture away, like MoveMore and stuff.
What is it all about, and what are your goals, or what is your vision with this project?
So first of all, as I mentioned, it began as a very personal project, and I actually have videos and things available that are online of me in maybe 2013, a good 10 kilos heavier, looking quite big, and talking about this, when I watch them back, they're really, really profound for me, because I'm speaking that time, 5 years ago, about the paradigm shift. I'm speaking about it, but I'd never heard of the paradigm shift before. I think my exact words are, I'm starting to find that a bodybuilding practice isn't all that there is. I think those are my exact words. Wow, you've grown, mate. But so it was first meant to document this. I wanted to start moving more. I became very interested in calisthenics, and that came through my encounter with a young gymnast girl who was working, no, she wasn't working, she was regularly attending the fitness centre where I had lots of PT clients at the time in Australia. And she would just always do handstands. She would do handstand walking in the studio. And this was before CrossFit was so popular across the globe. So, handstand walking was still quite, a thing. And when I was younger, I knew that when I was younger, I could do like handstand walking for a bit, and I could almost hold like what a kid would consider a handstand. And it was something I considered myself quite good at, like for someone who didn't practice it. And I would sometimes do this trick where I would just jump onto my hands, and lots of people would be like, whoa, it's really cool. And so I tried handstand walking, and I was an utter failure. Utter failure. Couldn't get on my hands, my wrists hurt too much, shoulders started hurting, I had no balance, and I was like, whoa, that's a bit disappointing. Like, it's always that moment, and this is always something really I think people should, it's a powerful tool. Remember yourself as a child, look at yourself now, and really take seriously what your child self would think of you now. If you're sitting in an office and you're not happy with it, and you're not happy with your lifestyle, and if your child self would look at you and basically cry because you're not playing anymore, you're not moving anymore, you're not in like the parks and stuff, I think that's something that everyone should take personally seriously, your child self. So yeah, that was my child self moment. I was like, if I looked at me now from then, I would want to punch myself. And so I tried looking for different ways. I started researching hand balancing. I've always been somewhat of an academic person, and I enjoyed research and I enjoyed learning, which was a strength I think helped me a lot. So I researched a lot, and then of course the most easy transfer from purely lifting weights and bodybuilding was calisthenics. And calisthenics, because it still has the strength element, of course, and the reps and all these things, and of course the physical aesthetics. I mean, if you go to a calisthenics park, you know, the eyes are turning left and right like they are in the fitness gyms secretly, and people got their shirts off and the sweat, that element's still there. So I was at home. But yeah, so I started listening to stuff from these calisthenics guys, and then next thing I knew, because of the strength I had in my shoulders, within a couple months, despite my bad mobility and inability to balance, I could do a handstand press. Jumping into it. So I have videos of like my first handstand press and stuff, and this became the transition, the MoveMore. And then slowly as it developed, and then I discovered, I became just solely, I went from just weights to calisthenics, and then I encountered the work of Ida Botal. And that was the verbalization for me of the paradigm shift. And it was after it really hit me. I had like some troubles with my shoulders and my back, and I wasn't getting more pull-ups, and it was really bugging me. I was doing all the research I could about how to get more pull-ups. I was following these routines, and then just after I just watched a few things, I was like, why do I want more pull-ups? Problem solved. Don't want more pull-ups. Problem solved. That was it. So simple. So the MoveMore project was a personal thing at first, and I called it the MoveMore project because it was about me wanting to move more, and I kept a diary. I kept a video diary, kind of still to this day, but it's my video diary, monthly installments of my skills and stuff progressing. It spans about 3 years. And when I arrived to Switzerland, actually shortly before the first movement workshop I did was in England. I did 2 short movement workshops there. It was when I was kind of actually just at the beginning of the Dunning-Kruger curve, to be honest, which is the one, you know, when you learn some stuff and then you think you know it all. And you're like, wow, yeah, I've got to show people this stuff. So, but actually it strongly came from calisthenics as well, because especially in my hometown, where I went back shortly for a few months to visit, I needed some money at the time as well. I was like, all right, do a workshop. So yeah, then it started becoming a sharing project, sharing the stuff that I was I had learned.
Yeah.
And lots of people started to find it useful, and I was kind of surprised because I was like, dude, this stuff's like free, available. This information you can just get yourself. But like the thing is, people like to have stuff packaged in a certain way. So I thought to myself, okay, well, if people are responding to this, I'm going to stick to this, because previously it was more about, you know, we'll do the fitness stuff and maybe I'll add some things on the side. But then from that point, I was like, no, I don't want to water this down. I still want to give the best information I can, but it will also reflect my personal journey, my movement perspective at that time. So if someone comes to a workshop with me 6 months ago and they come to a workshop 6 months later, you know, it's going to be completely different. Not only am I a different person, and I've consciously been trying to make myself a different person or evolve, they'll be different as well. Yeah. So that's when the MoveMore project came about, and then I started having people coming directly to me and emailing me, and of course I was kind of quite surprised that I've never been contacted directly for something unless someone wants money from me. Yeah, but now they're wanting to give me money for a certain thing. So it became a sharing project, and that's when I had to consciously make the decision, like, is this really what I want to do? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a decision. It was just like, yeah, oh yeah. Like, I just want to grow and develop, and the more I grow and the more I develop, the more I learn, the more I have to give. Mm. And it's an inspiration to keep learning more. The more I move, the more I learn through my movement, the more I can share. Just like this, I can reach more people. And, you know, I'll never try to share something that is I have no knowledge of. The stuff that I share, if it's taken from someone, I'll tell you. I have no qualms about that. You know, I would 10,000 times rather someone go to an Ido Portal workshop or a Fighting Monkey workshop, or another of the tens of thousands of great teachers there are out there, rather than me. But for some people, it's just convenient. I'm around the corner, and I'm very happy to be that guy. I have no aspiration to be a person earning loads of money and being a big figure that everyone references. It's not my desire at all. My desire is simply to share as much as I can, and quite nicely that goes well with traveling and experiencing. And for me, traveling is one of the best ways to gain experience, because you change everything around you. Just like putting a pull-up bar can change your movement experience. You change the whole landscape, the whole culture around you. The learning is inevitable through the frustration that happens in the process. Yeah, so it's a very kind of a sharing project, which is why I'm also reluctant to speak about teaching, because there's this element, especially earlier on, where I felt like I was being a phony.
Okay.
I'm saying I was something I wasn't. And the reason that came about is because, in a way, I was trying to emulate certain things. I mean, it's very difficult you can't just, when you learn something new, you can't just have your own ideas. There's a great quote from, it's actually a Chuck Palahniuk book, the guy who wrote Fight Club. He wrote another great book called Invisible Monsters. Okay. And a lovely quote. He says, I am nothing of me is original. I am the combined effort of everyone I've ever met. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To those words, yeah. And for me, that's completely true. And of course, that will express itself in a different way, in an integrated way, and then in an improvised way, in what is you. So for me, when I teach, I only want to call it teaching if someone feels they've learned something. Mm-hmm. It's the student's right, or I can't even call them student. It's their decision to say if I've taught them something, if they want to take me as a teacher or call me a teacher. If they just want to call me a friend, that's good enough.
Great. Is there something you are afraid of?
Yeah, of course. Like, fear is... I haven't studied much on fear. I can't speak from any authority or even from any books or anything I've read, other than, you know, the experience that everyone has of fear. But the concept of no fear, that's like saying, you know, no love. Everyone has some form of love at some point. It's inevitable. Fear is inevitable. It was there, it is there, it will be there. And me personally, fear that all my control mechanisms, by which I mean all the mechanisms I have for coping with the randomness of life, all the mechanisms I have for you know, staying calm and keeping myself, all the mechanisms I have for fostering good relationships and maintaining them, all the mechanisms I have and methods for sharing stuff with people, and what the content of what I'm sharing as well, that if these mechanisms break down, if they don't function, if it's wrong, like when you hit, now and then, sometimes you hit a point where it's like, wow, this isn't the right mechanism for coping with this. Like, I've developed this mechanism, it's not really working, it's quite a fear. So I guess that fear is more the fear of not having optionality.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now, my method for dealing with not having any options is by giving myself more options. But of course, how do you do that? Well, I mean, first of all, try not to attach yourself to too much, or try not to expect too much. And we can bring this back to, you know, Eastern thought with Buddhism and things like this, and the detachment from maybe to a different extent, as detachment from almost the physical world completely into the spiritual one, but an acceptance and an understanding of, first of all, the contingency of life. It's a process. You're not the first person who's going to die, and you won't be the last. It's a simple thing. Your loved ones, they're going to die. And you can just only hope that it will pass in a certain type of way. I think that's a first thing, that if you want to deal with the some of just the major fears of life and cultural fears, which scatter into these different problems, they filter into so many different problems. The desire for immortality. I mean, you don't have to necessarily, you know, come on, death, I'm facing you down. That's some people's reaction. You know, they take death straight on in the face. But a simple acknowledgement and understanding that it's a process that needs to happen. But then my fear would be that despite even all this, despite the mechanisms that I thought I had in place to cope with it, that if it comes about, if it didn't work. And I've been fortunate enough at the moment not to have those specific mechanisms tested.
Okay.
But that's a fear. You know, a fear that if theoretically in my mind what I think could happen, but then again, that's also me tying myself to an expectation, preparing for downfall. So yeah, it's this cycle. Okay. This cycle of attaching and then trying to detach, but it's difficult, and that can cause fear.
Thank you. I'd like to close with one of my favorite questions. I adapted from a book I read from John Strzelecki, The Big Five for Life, and it's called the Museum Question. Probably you heard of it.
No, maybe.
It's just like the scenario is the following. Imagine your life, every day in your life is like a day in a museum. And when you are dying, out of your life would be built your museum, your legacy. So how would you like to be or to see your museum?
Well, fantastically indulgent, egotistical question. I love it. Right, the museum of me. It should be playful. It should not be boring. It should be artifacts that you can interact with. There should be no boundaries or red rope around the exhibits. It should be quite rough, not too rough, rougher in some areas than others. There should be many different rooms, many different rooms that represent certain parts of a self that was as consciously as possible developed. There should be crossroads as well. There should be areas, small areas for possibilities that could have been but weren't. And there should be free food. Free food for many people. It should also be a place that people can just feel free to chill. A place of peace. A place where people hopefully gain some kind of inspiration in some form or another. I would like to think that whatever I do can, if it helps people in a certain way, I don't want to say I inspire people, but I would like to think that would be a great goal to have. I would like to have, by that time, when I'm dead, developed a certain amount of self that there's enough that other people can say, oh yeah, I want some of that. That helped me as well. So everyone should feel welcome. And there would be a special place there reserved for family. Just a family and friends place as well. That they can invite who they want to as well. But yeah, there would be that special section as well. For specific artifacts, to be honest, I'm not... In the past, it's really strange. As a child, I was very attached to items, like physical items. Like, I used to have my Star Wars toys that I used to steal. I was a child at the time, so you can't get me, but no, I used to steal a lot of stuff. No, so I used to steal toys. Anyway. Yeah, so I would keep them, like I would keep the box, and then I would sellotape part of the box. So I would open the box, and I would take the Star Wars toy out and play with it, and then put it back in the box and close it. And I would put them like stacked all in a specific drawer I had. I would put my Nintendo games in order, order of how I played them, or maybe a different day I would change the order if it was something different. Classic OCD symptoms of a child. Lots of children develop it, and I think it can be a very, if it continues into life, it can be a very problematic thing, especially when it then permeates your social relationships or the way you do business. Some cases it can be useful, but if not controlled, it can become a problem. So, yeah, my toys I would keep all like that. I would also, keep myself very neat and tidy. I would fold all my school clothes, and everything was quite kind of neat. But as I developed older, I consciously rebelled against that. Okay. I started to realize it was a problem. So if I found myself trying to turn off a light just because it was like I had to turn it off and on or something, I would stop myself doing it. I would try to brush my teeth the other way. I tried to undo these problems that I had. I started being deliberately more messy. So I can't even remember what the original question was, but there should also, in my museum, be a very neat and orderly place, but also an exact replica, all kind of like disjointed. That would be the two opposing sides.
Wow.
Just to represent that place.
Great story and wonderful ending, I'd say. Jason, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your experience with me, with us. So I'm really grateful that you have been in my house, in our house, Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been great being here, and this is the first interview I've done. It came quite unexpected, actually. I just was talking to you at the workshop we were both at. Exactly. But I think you're a fantastic individual, and I wish you all the best for your podcast. It's going to be very, very useful for a lot of people, and I hope people keep tuning in to the next episodes, because I know you have some fantastic people coming. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks.